and how much material they collect. And we did so by implementing a survey on around 90 individuals, and then doing a ticket analysis on the receipts that the waste pickers receive when they sell waste to scrap dealers. And finally, we had to compare it against the metal waste generation of Barcelona that we did through some statistical data, also collected on the economic and compared with economic data from the waste sector. In terms of results, first of all, we came to the conclusion that we estimate a number of around 2,000 waste pickers operating in Barcelona. This is the mean of the three different estimates that we run, which is a quite significant number on a city of around 1.7 million people. In terms of average collection rates, we estimate that on average, according to the survey, they collect around 82 kilos of waste per day per person, mainly iron, but also other types of metals like aluminum, wires, copper, and other things. In terms of income, though, we know that from the survey again, we know that they earn on average around 20 euros per day. And this is coming 45% of it from the collection of iron, of which they collect a lot, but it's quite cheap. And the other 55% from the selling of the other materials. In terms of the material role, first of all, of course, we had to try to understand how many hours and how many days they work per week and per year. So according to the survey, we established that they work on average around 56 hours per week, which is more than a full-time job in Spain. And we made the assumption from our observation that they work around 48 weeks per year. This means that in terms of full-time equivalent jobs, informal waste pickers in Barcelona perform more than 50% of all the hours performed in the waste collections activity of the city. This is a picture of the metal waste flows with the quantities that we have estimated through our analysis. The most important element of this picture, I would say, all these numbers, just to clarify, are in thousands of tons of waste. We know that the formal collection system processes around 68,000 tons of waste, of metal waste per year, and that almost 45,000 tons of waste are collected and managed through the informal waste picking activities, which basically means that informal waste pickers in Barcelona are responsible for the collection and the management of around 40% of all the metal waste that is produced by the city. So it's a huge role within the waste metabolism of the metal wastes of the city. In terms of economic role, then we try to compare this data around, let's say, the capacity of collection of informal waste pickers with the figures that we gathered on their earnings. And what comes out is basically a picture of very high exploitation. Because in terms of income, as I shared already earlier, they earn around 2 euros per hour, which is 20 euros per day, which is 1/8 of the Spanish, 1/5 of the Spanish minimum wage, and 1/8 of the average wage in the waste sector. So doing the same job or doing a similar job, they are paid much less. So there is a relative exploitation of 447% towards the Spanish minimum wage. And instead of, if we try to compare their income to their earnings against the metal prices, so the market prices at which the main metals that they collect are sold. Of course, the number is a bit lower because the market prices are lower than what they would be paid if they were paid, for example, a minimum wage. But they still show a picture of exploitation because the prices of the metals are sold then to the recycling industry for much higher prices than the prices that they can receive when they sell the metals per kilo. So then we try to do this, let's say, little thought experiment of imagining what would happen to the waste collection sector of the city of Barcelona if these workers were paid a higher wage. What you can see here is the current picture of the economic scope of the waste collection sector in the city. Which accounts for around for several hundred million euros. And we know that there are intermediate costs in blue, there are labor costs in orange, and then in blue we see the profits. And in light blue we see the profits. And in green, the little share is basically the income or the earnings that informal waste pickers receive for their job at the current state of things. If we imagine that informal waste pickers receive a minimum wage, basically this would immediately throw the profit below zero. So basically it would make the system unprofitable if they were paid a minimum wage. And of course, it would increase if they were paid an average wage. It would still be profitable, let's say, as a system or economically sustainable if they were paid market prices. But of course, the profits would reduce greatly. Finally, what we tried to do was investigate the environmental role of their work. And we looked at two figures. This part of the analysis is still a bit preliminary. But we looked at two figures, that of CO2 emissions and that of water use. And in particular, we tried to look at the impact of their work in terms of the saved emission and saved water use in the production of recycled metals from the scraps. And we focused mainly on ferrous scraps, which is the majority, but it's not the whole picture. And we came to the number of 48, around 42 to 48 tons of avoided CO2 emissions resulting from the work of waste pickers, and something between 48 and 80 cubic meters of water saved in the recycling processes. So this means that these tons, this water footprint and these CO2 emissions would happen if the new metal was produced starting from virgin materials, virgin iron, rather than from recycled iron from the scraps. So finally, and I'm going to conclude, informal waste pickers in Barcelona play a very significant role in the waste metabolism, both in terms of material role, because they work 58% of the hours worked in the sector, and they recycle around 40% of the material. They do so in a situation of very high exploitation, in which they are greatly exploited and they receive very low wages, while they basically invisibly subsidize the profitability of the waste collection sector of the city. And they play an environmental role because they contribute to the reduction of emissions and to reduction of the water footprint. I'm gonna stop for now. I think I'm within the 15 minutes, and I'm gonna leave the floor to Claudio and JB, and thank you very much for your attention so far.
Thank you, Daniele.
Thank you, Daniele. That was perfect.
As we said, we leave the Q&A session, the question after the free presentation. So then we will follow with Daniela Pelotti, who is professor of landscape at the University of Louvain and leads the urban metabolism research team. She will present that circularity always happens in a multi-species spaces, or why should we care of other than human life in socio-metabolic accountings. So the floor is yours, Daniela.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the invitation, Jean-Baptiste, Claudio, and also all the team of the project. So the title of my presentation that was just mentioned by Jean-Baptiste reflects the research focus that I've been one of the main research focus I've been interested in the since my postdoc, basically, which revolved around the role of non-human nature or other than human nature in socio-metabolic accountings. So in particular within the industrial and socio-ecological approach to socio and urban metabolic accounting. So the title of my presentation reflects this interest that I've been having in terms of understanding what about when we assess the metabolism of cities, of territories, or regions, how much are we actually speaking also of the metabolic needs of other than human species. So it's this from this standpoint, it's I can contribute to the discussion on grassroots circularity today, but also from another standpoint, which is one of my personal story as what can be defined as an urban greening refugee. So an urban greening refugee can be defined as a person that has lost their home because of an urban greening intervention. So because an urban development plan that has been implemented in cities to enhance the square meters of green surface, but without not necessarily, of course, thinking of the consequences of this greening project. So it is really from the perspective, a personal perspective of being evicted, basically forcibly evicting from the place where I used to live and spend most of my time. At the time I was a student at the Polytechnic University of Milan, living in Stecca degli Artigiani. Some of you who have Italian backgrounds get to know Milan, might know what this place was, which was forcibly evicted in 27 because of Bosco Verticale. So the picture that you see in the first slide of my presentation is actually what's been defined as nature-based solution. So an urban greening intervention has been very controversial, of course, in Milan, and that was actually the cause why me and many of my colleagues and friends at the time had lost our home. So it's from, of course, the perspective of being an urban greening refugee, as pretty much, I believe, influences the way I look at the role of urban nature in metabolic accounting, especially when looking at plans for enhancing the circularity of cities and regions. Okay, so having said that, a little bit about the positionality where this word comes from, the presentation I would like to share with you today as development in three main steps. So in the first step, I will a little bit share with you a few thoughts about what is the state of the art in terms of the consideration of other than human nature in social ecology, metabolic accountings. And the second part, I will delve a little bit more into this ecosystem service narrative, which has been also influenced in latest year, even including from my own work, the social ecology approach to social metabolic assessment. And the third part of my presentation will present some new ideas and new hope for the future of social metabolic study to perhaps take on board a new perspective and a new way of looking at the role of other than human nature in metabolic accounting. Okay, so it might be some of you might already maybe acquainted with the understanding. I don't even say the definition, but the understanding of what metabolism, socio-economic metabolism is in industrial and social ecology. But I would like to recall this definition. Also, Daniele mentioned defined metabolism also at the beginning of his presentation. But I think it's really important to perhaps recall this presentation, this definition that was the one that is proposed by among the main proponents of the social ecology school, even in the industrial ecology line of thinking in terms of metabolism. So here, social metabolism is the key link between society and the natural environment. And to reproduce its biophysical structures, society requires a continuous flow of energy and materials that need to be extracted from and eventually released to the environment. So we see this already, this dualism, of course, between society and environment in this definition. And in the same vein, this definition continues on. Communication is the key link between individual human consciousness and culture. So I will have to leave out the second part of the definition, so the one that engages more with the communication aspect, but I think it's a very interesting one. But mostly we'll concentrate on the first part of this definition, so the one that defines the relationship with society and environment. So the kind of quintessential translation in terms of a conceptual scheme of this definition of metabolism can be found in this diagram that was published in a really interesting monography edited by the main proponents of the social ecology approach in industrial within the industrial ecology family to socioeconomic metabolism. So yeah, we can really understand the positionality of the social ecology vis-a-vis the role of societies and its relationship with the environment. Society is presented as a hybrid sphere, which is basically made by continuous interaction with the natural environment on the one hand and the cultural environment, the cultural system as they define it, based on that communication aspect, which I say we might not have the time to address today. So society is really a hybrid that continuously exchange materials from nature, from the earth system here, but also continuously exchange communications with the cultural system. So the interesting, what you see in the black arrows are basically the way in the red arrow are the way in which the labor, so human work, transform basically this natural environment and transform, for example, non-human nature into living stock or construct artifacts. And whatever is, let's say, is not useful anymore in terms of energy transformation is rejected into the environment. So my question here, when looking at this framework, is okay. Where's the place of how is really non-human nature characterized, but from being generally defined as the environment? So we see non-human nature in three main different, let's say, aspects, three main different places of this diagram, if you will. So the first, number one, is really the natural stock. So what I've been just saying, so it's been transformed through labor in order to produce those material flows and stocks that society needs, of course, to survive and thrive. It's so number one. It's number two is the livestock. So the non-human nature transform into animals and some also plants reared for and domesticated for human use in terms of mostly food or what also medical purposes and so on. And third, nature as a waste sink, which I just also mentioned briefly. So the places where all the non-used and non-valuable outputs from work lands up, finish it. So it's interesting because although there's been an implicit interest in understanding how this and the conception of non-human nature in socioeconomic metabolism, it's been a quite recent push to understand how this vision of the human nature can be maybe alimented, nurtured, or maybe contested through looking at similar frameworks, basically, that have been, been developed for a long time now, of course, around this relationship between society and environment. And one of these is, of course, even one of the most popular among the discussion and maybe in the social and industrial ecology is the ecosystem service narrative, right? So I am myself been attracted with my lab, of course, attracted by the idea of thinking of looking at the inter overlaps, crossovers between the economy-wide material flow analysis, which is, most of you might know, be familiar with this idea of understanding, translating the socioeconomic metabolism in the continuous exchanges of material flows, and they are becoming stocks. Stocks are, for example, one of the most easy to figure out, also food and agricultural stock in our current translational metabolic framework into modeling. And so how could we think of the possible crossovers between the economic wide material flow analysis, one of the quintessential translation of metabolism, and 25 years old, even more, ecosystem service framing of the relation, especially one of the latest translation in terms of accounting, but also of classification, the Common International Classification of Ecosystem Services, which in a way or another also rests on some of the earliest ecological economics attempts to translate this idea of the services provided to nature, from nature to humans, that according to this perspective, to this narrative, contributes together with other sort of capitals, contributes to human well-being. So we have been, let's say, with my team playing the game and say, okay, let's endorse an ecosystem service now, and let's see what happens. And we have been busy developing an integrated framework tied to put together these two narratives. So say, okay, where are the ecosystem services niched in when we think of the economy-wide material flow analysis? So the different categories that make up these models of metabolic accounting. And we have been, very interesting delving out the fact that we might see this niched as either as direct contribution, like the flows, material flows that contribute directly, for example, to, of course, societal functioning. Like the easiest thing to think are energy carriers, of course, fossil fuels or non-fossil fuel energy carriers, in the sense we're looking at ecosystem service. So contributing to the metabolism, but also offset flows. So flows that are not necessarily, can be conceptualized as direct contribution, but in terms of, for example, offset of carbon or carbon sequestration. That can be understood as offset flows. So the flows that coming from this perspective of ecosystem service can kind of contribute to offset the import of other materials. So both in terms of directly contributive flows, but also of offsetting flows that kind of reduce the dependency of society from other material flows. And this pretty much rely to this can be seen as directly connected to this natural capital versus social capital understanding, also can be translated into a supply demand also dynamics, when we take then again the narrative, the kind of approach and perspective from the ecological economics, part of the ecological economics, at least ecosystem service point of view. So we apply this framework to several cities. These are the results, funny results for Lima, in which the city of Lima in Peru. So we find out that when this is one of the most interesting perspective we can share, is that when looked with this perspective of ecosystem service, the role of nature in this assessment is really, let's say, disappointing. Only when using the ecosystem service perspective, only a very limited contribution of these are the really tiny red lines of non-human nature can be seen through the metabolism. So we analyzed 5 ecosystem services: bio-waste to energy, cane mass for construction. So cane mass is a local bio-based material, urban agriculture, water harvesting, carbon sequestration. And all of this, as you can see from the time, except for water, which is, of course, for the reason of magnitude of flows, but which are not barely comparable to the other flows. All the other flows were really disappointing in terms of potential contribution to the entire metabolism of the urban region. So this is the same thing seen in a different perspective. Only the water provision was, when seen in the reference year, which we analyzed in the Metabolism 2014, or also the projection we did to 2050, only the water provision might potentially respond to, when harvested locally, might potentially respond to the water needs of the region, although relying on a heavy desalinization process, or very energy intensive process. Of course, the region could be self-sufficient, even exceed that in terms of energy, in terms of water provision, but with high energy demand associated to it. And the other ecosystem say, which could have been presented as providing a form of self-sufficiency, so non-human nature really responding to the sheltering need in this case for the local population, was the cane mats as a construction material. So these local materials provided that all, of course, the part of the suitable, let's say, sheltering needs were responded to a supply through cane mats as a construction material. So apart from these two, the other ecosystem services were providing up to 4% of the total supply. So it was really the total demand in terms of supply. So it was really minor contribution that could be devised if you look at this. So what about the implementation? As I was mentioning in the beginning, I think these things become even more compelling when we look not only at the assessment side of metabolic frameworks, but also at the implementation side. When we think of course, circularity is one of the subjects of the discussion today in terms of applying metabolism to circular urban planning, for example. So what about the implementation of this ecosystem service perspective? One of the way which has been massively translated in planning perspective is the idea of the nature-based solution. So the idea of, and I come back to the initial picture of my presentation, so Bosco Verticale, the idea that some, of course, planning requirement can be satisfied using this urban greening intervention that might, according to the given, of course, frameworks, have specific, of course, benefits. So this has been a dominating way of translating ecosystem services. The literature is booming. You can see in the graph there, there've been, a very steep increase in terms of the number of publications that includes this idea of nature-based solution. Although there's no one single definition of it, it's considered as a vaguely defined concept, which in a way and another can be shortly, let's say, defined as ecosystem-based approaches that address societal challenge and while deliver social and environmental benefits, although this has been also contested, of course, definition in terms of its shortcomings to many inequality questions that they rise. And and so building on this, the result of the ecosystem service assessment I just discussed, and also to some extent this booming domination of this new way of translating ecosystem service into circular, let's say, planning practices. And I come to the final part of my presentation. I've been working on with few colleagues. I have the chance to discuss from several disciplines a new way of perhaps framing this the metabolic presence of non-human nature in the assessment, but also in implementation. And in this, always sticking to ecological economics, maybe, which of course have a really rich story of dealing with this understanding of the role of nature within the construction and the becoming societies of part of the human world. And looking at this aspect and proposing this hypothesis, conceptualizing and operationalizing other than human nature within urban development processes and the becoming natural capital, like in the case of Bosco Verticale, Milan, or the becoming nature-based solution of this of land development and real estate capital investment, can be analyzed by deploying the world system intellectual and political framing of global South nature in the global geopolitical dynamics. So using all the discussions and literature been describing the role of global South nature in the global geopolitical dynamics to understand maybe this metabolic flows differently. And in particular, the key concept in this family of works that have been, from ecological economics, but also in social ecology, be applied to understand the relationship between, for example, in this case, France and its former colonies. The key concept that has been used, and also, of course, let's say, analytical framework deployed to analyze this relationship, material relationship, is the ecological and equal exchange concept and framework, which some of you might be already familiar with, which basically describe how wealthier population disproportionately have access to natural resource and sink capacity. These are the resource flows and stocks, if we think in metabolic terms, resulting also not only in disproportionate access to those resources, but also in unequal distribution of environmental harms and suppressed well-being of other population. This is quite wide, embraced definition by Alf Ornborg, one of the main proponents of the ecological and equal exchange. I don't have the time to go too much in the detail, but just to open the maybe also for the discussion, the idea that is driving my work lately to go beyond this ecosystem service narrative that we have just used. So use this ecological and equal exchange to basically highlight the increasing inequality at regional level in terms of exchange, material exchange among communities, but to stick to the topic of the role of non-human nature also between anthropogenic built environment and other human habitat in situ, particularly within the nature-based solution approaches, so the nature-based development processes, like in the case of Bosco Verticale, again, which I've been seeing at the beginning. So in a few words, and that's the last contribution, the last maybe this slide I would like to share, what I'm looking at now, together with this team of colleagues from different disciplines, is what could be finally the translation of this ecological and equal exchange, understanding basically the material, exchange, metabolic exchange, metabolic needs between also not only between different urban communities, but also not only at the regional level by context to the national level, which this scheme has been historically developed, but also at the regional level, and including the relationship between human and non-human also habitats. So how can we understand ecological and equal exchange engendered by socioeconomic metabolism at regional level, but in a multi-species space? And in particular, at the bottom of the slide, when nature-based solution, land use change is involved. So when we are basically driving this material exchange because we are responding to the need for building this nature-based solution developments. And in what I'm trying to now to work towards is this idea of potentially being able to link inequal import of material and export of waste and emission that are, of course, mobilized during the construction, but also the operational phases of nature-based development on the one end, but also because, of course, this nature-based development always happens in a multi-species space, looking, of course, of the change over time of the habitats, the multi-species habitat that's of course, affected by the deployment of this nature-based solution, which always interfere with the habitats of other than human species, and using different landscape ecology or ecological assessment tools that have been developed for years in terms of understanding how we can assess but also monitor the change of non-human habitats in time. So this is delving on a part of my recent work on the understanding of where are these non-human habitats and how can we actually assess them in the city of Brussels. So the maps that you see at the screen is really a first attempt to assess how we can monitor using the resource-based habitat, which is a landscape ecology way of looking at the way the metabolic needs of species in the city can be monitored, and they change over time using landscape metrics. So I don't have the time to delve into this, but yeah, I just wanted to conclude with this message of hope. Maybe there have been other ways to look at the relationship between human and non-human habitats in metabolic assessment using other tools than ecosystem service research. Yes, and I'll stop there and very much welcome your question. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Daniela. Congratulations, super interesting and cross-cutting topic. So now we have our third panelist, who is Enric Tello, an environmental historian at the University of Barcelona. And so he will discuss a topic related on agroecology and closed-loop circular economy. So what can we learn from this from a historical perspective? And that Enric is also, I would say, a relevant figure because in energy studies, he has been capable to invent, let's say, the circular concept in ROI, energy return on input, which is this input-output linear system. And Enric has developed the concept of a circular ROI, but this will be explained in his presentation. So, Enric, the floor is yours. Enrique, you are muted. If you can hear us, yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much for the invitation. This circular approach is not mine only, it's also Claudio's and many other people working together. Let me, sorry, put my presentation.
We already see your presentation, Enrique.
Yeah, we can see it perfectly in full
We
screen.
can see it.
Okay,
Yeah.
so let's move from the city perspective to the city's agri-food footprint, right? And consider this socio-metabolic approach also from the cities, of course, but connecting the city with this agri-food provisioning footprint, which is absolutely necessary, crossing two approaches that need to be crossed, which are a social metabolism from ecological economics standpoint and agroecology. So I am going to present 3 or 4 main ideas. The first one is this: only in my view, only agroecosystems can attain an almost fully circular bioeconomy by means of co-producing with natural systems, with nature. And to understand that is interesting to compare what's the difference. This is one of the main ideas I want to introduce between playing or producing with living beings or not, right? Or processing abiotic materials is completely different. And I think that this is not yet being acknowledged and introduced in the literature on social metabolism. Life on Earth is negentropic, as Rodinger explained it in this wonderful book, or emergetic, as Howard Odum explained, because nested self-reproducing funds that are alive, of course, can cyclically store useful energy inside, dissipating the high entropy. They do not, they must produce necessarily outside. If you compare with the linear industrial processing of abiotic materials, they can be recycled, as you can see here in this or the other flow diagrams that Daniela has shown from Vienna. They are mainly linear, right? Compared with this. There is some possibility to recycle or downcycle, but there is a limit on the total quantity of these non-renewable abiotic materials, and they can only be downcycled, not fully recycled. The second idea is that agroecology, farmers producing through agroecology means, sorry, because I need, well, are circular as long as they produce together with, to co-produce with nature, but under a condition, which is very important, provided they comply with the law of cyclical return. This idea comes from several people, but I take this wonderful book by Vandana Shiva, who really fits the world, that she presents this idea from the indigenous and traditional peasant communities in the global south particularly. The idea is that of this law of return embedded in the cosmovision of many indigenous and peasant culture means that according to this approach, humans mustn't take everything from nature in order to live enough biomass production for the rest of the species. And whenever they take something, they must give her something back in return. This is the way that presents this law of return Robin Wall Kimmerer, biologist, and also coming from an indigenous Potawatomi nation in the United States. So the big idea of this second idea I want to present here is that the sustainability of agroecosystems depends mainly on this relationship on what you take from this flow of final product extracted and sent to consumers, that means mainly cities, and what farmers can return or left unharvested for the rest of nature to reproduce. So this main principle of a circular bioeconomy of agroecosystems is that these living and self-reproducing funds can feed us if we feed them. That's the basic idea. And this crossing these concepts with social metabolism and Georgescu-Reagan distinction between stock resources and funds with agroecology presents this conceptual differentiation of social metabolism, which I think this is new for this seminar, is necessary to introduce. On the one side, the difference that Georgescu-Reagan stressed between stock resources and funds is that stock resources are depletable and can be exploited at any rate, whereas funds can only provide a limited flow. Of course, renewable funds can only provide a limited flow per unit of time, and I am adding from this agroecological point of view, under a law of return if they are living and self-reproductive funds. So combining both, we can distinguish in the non-renewable part, the non-cyclicable, because they are energy carrier, as Daniela said, or down-cyclicable if they are metal ores. But in the renewable side, we have on the one side the flows provided by living and self-reproductive funds like soils, like livestock, like crops, like pastures, like forest. And once we have taken the harvest of these living funds, they are no longer living, and of course can be traded as stocks and downcyclable, but not fully recyclable. And in the case of firewood and charcoal, as used as energy carriers, they are non-cyclable at all. And then there is a special case that Daniela also stressed, which is water, but I am leaving this in order to consider how this was so important for the circular social metabolism of basically agrarian economy in the past. In this diagram, you can see that this kind of societies were solar-based, and almost all the production consumption chains, this is the pre-industrial consumption baskets, depend on this biomass net primary production of photosynthesis in cropland, pastoral, and woodland, with only very minor entries of hydropower, wind energy carriers, and also from the subsoil, very small amounts of metal ores and mines. And this involved very tight limits to growth, because increasing any share of final consumption baskets involved enlarging the areal scope of these living funds one another. And in the end, as all classical economists accepted, would lead to a final steady state that they considered to be attained very soon. Here you can see the diagram that the physiocrat François Quenet brought, which is wonderful because it's absolutely circular, and started from the soil. Yeah, fertile soils, okay? And it's considered that Kenne produced the first input-output table before Leontiev. And we combine this with Karl Marx, the one that coined the term of social metabolism, in order to emphasize that in the economic thinking and in the practice of economic growth, the GDP growth, this relationship between biophysical circular flows and monetary flows were split absolutely. The biophysical flows faded out, were set aside in this capital stock income flow in neoclassical economics. And ecological economics has recovered this relationship with social metabolism, but we need to combine again both in order to understand how money is a switcher of biophysical flows, right? And of course, of unequal, as Daniela stressed, unequal ecological and social exchanges. Okay, so in order to address this research, we need to emphasize that the technosphere is absolutely linear, or almost absolutely linear, as you can see here. This flow diagram comes also from the Institute of Social Ecology in Vienna, and you can see that in 2015, the re or down cycling is very small amount compared to the rest of the social metabolism, the global social metabolism of the global economy, which is absolutely linear. And this means that while the biosphere is absolutely circular, our technosphere, here you have the images, the satellite images of the net primary production functioning during the day, so with the photosynthesis, and here the same images in the night, in the not receiving solar radiation, and these points are, of course, metropolitan areas, industrial sites, highways, port vessels, and so on. So this linear technosphere is clashing with the circular biosphere of our planet. And very interesting, the data provided by this article from Vienna also discovered that in the beginning of the 20th century, this global economy, the social metabolism, was more circular than now in relative terms. In absolute terms, you can see how all has grown, also biomass, also biotic flows. But in relative terms, what explains why now is less cycling than at the beginning of the 20th century is the smaller share of biotic flows. So this is again a proof that co-producing with nature through agroecosystem is circular or can be circular, but it is not only the change between these abiotic flows compared to the biotic ones, what explains why we live in a world which is not absolutely circular in terms of our technosphere, but also the green revolution, the full industrialization of farming. Because this has turned this co-production, this circular co-production of with nature of agroecosystem in traditional organic, or now in organic and agroecological approach to farming, to this also in agriculture absolutely or almost absolutely linear agroindustrial management, depending on external inputs that are being grown and grown and grown, directly or indirectly coming from fossil fuels. And this imprints, and this is combined with the approach of Daniele, imprints in the landscape outside the cities, of course, but also near the cities, a landscape uh, ecology, in this case agroecology, that the circular, traditional, or agroecological ones create these landscape mosaics you are seeing here with a lot of differentiated habitats and ecotones between them, with a lot of biodiversity associated to these organic agroecosystems. Whereas this linear agroindustrial management produces monocultures that destroys most of these habitats and reduces a lot this biodiversity associated to agroindustrial, in this case, landscapes. And I am going to finish with the first main idea, which is that because of that, explained, agroecology and agroecosystems and or agri-food systems based on agroecology could be a largest part of the solution, being this industrial farming a great part of the global environmental crisis we are today. Here you have the planetary boundaries being trespassed due to these agro-industrial food systems we live in. But at the same time, and because of this this capacity of agroecosystems to co-produce in a true circular way with nature, the agroecology transition has the capacity to provide a large part of the solution in order to cut this trespassing of planetary boundaries and provide a good life for all within planetary boundaries. And let me finish stressing the fourth idea. It is not in the presentation, but on the agency on that. To advance this agroecology transition, which is much more or as important as the energy transition to renewables in energy, we need farmers. Farmers are key, and we are losing farmers every day. This is very important. In order to support farmers and farmers' reproduction is key, particularly in the global south, where they are killed a lot of times, and they are displaced with this advancing of the agro-industrial frontiers in the global south. But also we need another thing that is combined with Daniele and Daniela presentations. Because in order to advance in these 5 levels of the agroecology transition, farmers are needed, but are not enough. We have to close the circularity with the consumers, and consumers are in cities. In order to advance from level 2, 3 to level 4, we need to relocalize our food systems with agroecology-based local and regional food systems. And this means combining the social metabolism of cities with this socio-metabolic circular agroecology-based food systems. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Enrique. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Also the capacity to summarize in 20 minutes so many insights. So now we can leave the floor open to questions. Maybe you can raise your hand and we give you the microphone to put the question to the speakers. And if you cannot open the microphone, we can maybe read it from the chat.
Don't be shy because we don't have a lot of time. 23 minutes, so
yeah,
please ask questions. So I don't see anyone. I'm sure that
Yes, we have
Patrick, we have
Rakendu.
someone. So
Yeah.
we can take 2, 3 questions in a row, and maybe it will facilitate the um, the panelists. They can talk about it. So what can do? We listen to you.
Yeah.
Hi, thank you very much for all the presentations. I am Rakindu. I am from India and I work in a similar area. I'm a PhD candidate in IIT Bombay here. So, my question is to the first presenter, Daniel Rico. So, I work similarly in the area of informal waste workers and circular economic transitions in Global South. So, I was wondering. So, if is there an effort for formalization in Barcelona as well, and how the formalization efforts are being turning out? And so, in India, what we found is that it's not always an antidote to formalization is always not an antidote to informal precariousness. How the formalization is turning out is in a way uh, which is beneficial to the large private players. So I would like to ask what are the observations in Barcelona?
Thank you. We have another question from Katavirag in the chat. Do you see the potential of a potential pathway for bringing people closer to food and closing the circle regarding permaculture and regenerative agricultural practices? And maybe I have a last one for all of three regarding the notion of working with nature or labor of nature. What does it practically mean for you, for three of you? And how is it useful for building truly circular metabolism? And what political and ethical shifts would this require today? So we have 3 questions. I don't know who want to start. Daniele, maybe?
Maybe Daniela do
Daniela?
the first.
Daniele?
Sure. Maybe before answering, JB, can you repeat the concept? You said the concept of working with nature.
Yeah, labor of nature. Labor of nature, working with nature. Something like that.
Can you help me define it? I'm not sure I'm extremely aware of it.
Yeah, it's maybe more, it's not very close for you, but you know, because of metals, but we can consider metals from nature. So, or does it mean to working with materials, something like that?
Hmm.
But but I'm sorry for the follow-up question. Is it a specific theoretical framework or just the idea of how to? Okay. Thank you very much.
Maybe Daniela, you can answer the first question and then
Yeah.
maybe get inspired from
Yeah.
Enrique and Daniela for your second.
I will do this. Thank you very much for the question from the colleague working in India. The issue of formalization in relation to informal recyclers in Barcelona, um, it's quite simple in the sense that there are no formalization efforts ongoing in the city and in the region. There was an effort that was implemented by the municipality at this point around 10 years ago, which was the creation of a cooperative that was supposed to help these workers uh, in formalizing their working activities as a mean for them to get into the formal economy and then to be formalized. This because in Barcelona, most of the informal way speakers are migrants, extra-European migrants, especially from Latin America, but mostly from Africa. And which means that for them, the main reason why they are in the informal economy is that because they are undocumented migrants, they don't have papers, so they cannot access to the formal labor market. So there was this effort to create this cooperative with the aim of helping them being regularized according to the Spanish migration laws. But it didn't really work because it was a top-down attempt, and it ended up not being economically viable. And since then there has been no attempt to formalize them. And it could be quite tricky, in my opinion, to try to formalize them through normal ways of formalization that we can see apply to informal way speakers, for example, in Southeast Asia or in Latin America, such as cooperatives or associations, workers' associations, precisely because of their character of undocumented migrants. For many people working in way speaking in Barcelona, way speaking is a survival strategy that allow them to survive as undocumented individuals because it is not a formal activity. So making it formal bears the risk of maybe supporting the people who are doing way speaking now, but gating the activity from other people that might want to access it in the future. Nevertheless, of course, it would be interesting to find ways to formalize or to at least organize these workers in order for them to be able to organize and fight for better working conditions. But it's a bit of a complicated issue, and it has not been developed politically yet. Yeah, would be my answer to the question.
Thank you, Daniel.
Thank you. Now, Daniela or Enrique, you want to start addressing the second question, which was on permaculture and regenerative agriculture. I think the question was mainly for you. Do you see this a potential pathway for bringing people closer to food and closing the circle?
Okay, thank you very much, Kata, for this point. Agroecology includes all these forms to advance toward more circular, more peasant-based, more sustainable ways of farming, more complex. For example, organic labeling means what is called level 2 of agroecology transition, because it's very important, organic farming, in terms of certifying that they give up these fossil fueled external inputs, mainly not tractors, but fertilizers, synthetic fertilizers, and biocides, pesticides, and so on. That's important. But organic labels only says what not to do. But there is the possibility to get this label and not go and having, for example, a big exporting monoculture. This happens, for example, in California and some parts. And then in agroecology and organic farming too, we started talking about conventionalization of organic farming. Regenerative is also very interesting. There is some risks of using the called regenerative agriculture or something else as greenwashing, but nevertheless, when it is taken seriously, the emphasis they put, not only them, but particularly them, on regenerating soil biota, is very important. And also permaculture and others. So agroecology embraces all these practices. Agroecology is defined itself as being a science, a movement, and a practice. And the practices involves all these, right? And this connects with another point that I want to stress. I have not had time to mention, but is the issue of the metabolic rift between cities and countryside and agroecosystems. Why we need to relocalize the circuits, the cycling of food between cities and producers at the local and regional, or the FAO talks about city region food systems. The one main reason is because we need to return to the soils the organic matter that these crops have in them when sent to the cities. And we have a big metabolic problem in cities, which is wasting these resources and not closing this social metabolism of organic matter we excrete as humans, okay? This is a pending task and can only be advanced and dealt if we relocalize these circuits. But also there are social reasons to do that in order to avoid, for example, unequal ecological and equal and social changes of these extractivists from south to feed the north, for example. So yes, thank you for the question. And about the labor of nature question, if I understood correctly, we insist on that in the case of agroecosystems, because farmers co-producing, collaborating with nature. This is the definition of organic matter, organic farming, producing with nature, not against nature, right? So yes, I mentioned in a moment Marx. Remember that Marx reacted against the first sentence of the Social Democratic Party in German that said only labor creates wealth, creates value, said. And Marx said, no, that's wrong. A wrong idea about my writings and so on. Nature creates useful values. And without nature, human labor could not transform these raw materials and these resources, a word that we have to decolonize a bit and to look at what is within, okay? Without nature, we could not labor human could not do not produce any useful value. And Marx added, and it is this what is wealth, not the price value, okay? The commodity value. I don't know if this answered your question. Sorry.
Yes, that's perfect. Thank you. Daniela, you want to finish?
Maybe just to continue on the question in terms of the work of nature, this is a really important point, and there's been a lot of discussion in different communities in terms of whether we should understand what nature is doing to, as Eric just mentioned, to co-produce, our possibility to be fed through agricultural practice, different kind of agricultural practice. So I think there's a lot of discussion in terms of wording. So should the word labor be used when we understand the work of nature? And this pretty much depends on the perspective, if you are taking an over neo-Marxian geographic perspective versus more ecological economics point of view, in which you might understand that labor as the thing that, through which, value different kind of values, given what also Rick mentioned about the distinction between use value and exchange value in neo-Marxian economics as well. So the term labor is quite contested because not everyone would agree in the different disciplines that nature does labor and produce value, but where things, at least in the from the social ecology's metabolism perspective, that nature does produce work, this is widely accepted perspective. And even more so lately, with this eco-socialism, new readings of Marxian, capital, and also the idea even of the metabolic rift, even though it was, of course, Marx didn't use the term rift itself, but he thought about that and thinking of the metabolic rift of the soil, of the agroecology discussion that Eric was telling. So actually, I think there's a lot of disciplinary mismatching in terms of the LR, but the naturalist works, and I pretty much personally very interested in new perspective in terms of understanding the work of nature's free gifts, which is exactly what motivated my proposal of looking at this ecological unequal exchange. The fact is systematically under capitalist regimes, the work of nature is not valued as such. And this is why there is capital accumulation, because you don't value that. We, of course, here we keep the terms of value open, but because of that, there is capital accumulation. And thinking with Alicia Battistoni, fantastic new book, The Free Gifts, I'm really with those that say, of course, the fact that nature is not valued is not just by chance. It's not like capitalism forgot to give a value to nature or a problem. It's just systematically inherent to the way capitalism works, because thanks to that, not only we kind of exploit nature, and so we accumulate capital thanks to that, but also the people that work in metal, so the farmers, as Eric mentioned, but also we are precluding new ways of imagining this relationship to nature, which, for example, Lisa Battistoni is even worse perhaps. So we are, this idea that capitalism preclude the valuing of nature is even worse, because it does not encourage new way of looking at that relationship. It kind of blinds our way of looking at that. So it's a very key aspect, I think, when we are, across all our three presentations. So very much thank you for that question.
Okay, thank you. And Daniele, I don't know if you want to try to address this question. And in any case, there is also another one for you from the public in the chat, from Alice. So keep in mind this question from JB, and also this other one is like, do the Barcelona authorities see the informal sector as part of the circular economy strategies, or do they pretend it doesn't happen, isn't needed?
Sure. Well, in regard to JB's question, well, I will definitely not be able to be as elaborate probably as Daniela and Rick in the reflections, because it is something that indeed I've never reflected upon so much in my work. But what it's interesting to say is that I think the relationship that informal recyclers in Barcelona, but also in other places of the world, for what I have been able to observe so far, have is a relation that is very, in a way, very genuine and very direct relation with nature and with the materiality, because it's a relation that is very directly connected with their subsistence, no? So the reasons why informal waste pickers engage with the materiality of waste, be it in metals recycling like in Barcelona, or in landfills as in other places in the world, the way they engage with the materiality of waste, it's very essential for them, because from the way in which they will manage to transform and manage waste, their survival depends, no? And in doing so, they are effectively fostering the circularity, fostering environmental sustainability, diverting emission, diverting pollution. And I think this is interesting. It's not a well formed reflection, but rather an intuition that maybe connects also with more well-known theories such as the environmentalism of the poor. So this idea that the material relation of these workers with nature is beneficial, while at the same time being essential for both the parties involved, which in a way it might be different from other ways of engaging with nature that are more liberal like more seeing humanity as something separated from nature that has to be managed or has to be saved. While in this case, it's really a matter of like mutual support and mutual survival. And in relation to the question of Alice or Alice, apologize for mispronouncing the name possibly. The approach of cities authorities or the position of cities authorities in Barcelona towards informal sector, it's something in between the denial, I would say, or the relegation of the topic to a social emergency. So basically, in the few instances in which we had the chance to engage with local authorities, especially the people who are working around waste, so who are in charge somehow of waste management, they usually claim that our numbers are potentially not real, and that we are overestimating the contribution of informal recyclers to the waste, to the metal waste metabolism. So they are underplaying a bit the role of the recyclers, or they are claiming that there is some sort of competition between the formal waste collection system and the informal recyclers, which to a certain extent is true, but we believe that they are also complementary in a way. And if we try to engage with the politicians or the authorities from a more political or social perspective, asking what is their plan to engage with the existence of 2,000 people who are heavily exploited and in a situation of marginalization, they don't tend to see them as actors that could be potentially beneficial for the circularity of the city, but rather as people that are in need of social assistance at best. So people that are marginalized, that needs to be helped somehow, which is a bit sad, I would say, because in fact, what we have noticed in our research and what we have found out is that they can be a great assets for the city, apart from being people who, of course, are entitled to social and human protection and for the human rights to be respected.
Okay, thank you, Daniele. So we are running out of time. We still have some questions, so if you don't mind, I would allow this last round of questions. And meanwhile, I'm going to send via chat the webpage of the webinar series, if you didn't know. And also remember, the next webinar will be on the 26th at 2 p.m., which will be a book presentation, Contested Waste, about waste pickers conflict in the Global South. And we also have a Zoom link, which is different from today's, and it's here in the chat. So I'm going to send it. And so I think we have one question from Michele. For any of the speakers, what if we apply Daniele's research approach to the work of grassroots organizations? As in, how could we go about measuring the metabolic contribution in terms of material use, land, water, food, of small-scale experiments, kind of the no-utopias? So in bold, now the question is there research being done on their metabolic contribution, and what methods are most appropriate? So this is the first question from Michele. Then I think Luca raised the hand, so you can turn the microphone and put your question.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much.
Questions and short answer.
Yes, short answer. That's awesome.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much. It's Luca Battisti from University of Turin, Italy. I have a question mainly for Daniele, because as a University of Turin, we're involved in a project that also addresses the issue of waste pickers, especially in Tanzania, where the government intends to reduce, if not eliminate, informal groups by establishing formal waste companies, which will incorporate only a portion of the current informal waste pickers. So the question is, what should be done, if you have an idea, with those who will not be included in those companies? Is there still a place for them in waste collection, or is better to provide tools and support to help them
understand alternative livelihoods they could pursue. Thank you.
Thank you, Luca. And then there was a question that appeared in the chat, and it was actually before Alice's. I'm sorry I didn't see it before, but it's from Kai, and it's asking, like, if you look at from Daniele, the contributions of informal speakers towards lower environmental impact, but have you also looked at the opposite? For instance, when they dismantle refrigerators, and releasing CFC gases and other negative effect of dismantling products, which have a much higher climate impact than carbon, or the release of other toxins due to a lack of regulated practices.
So maybe we start with Daniele and then Enrique and Daniela.
Yes.
The first question.
Sure. Maybe I will mainly address these last two questions from Luca and from Kai, and I will try to be brief. Regarding Kai's question, well, actually, no, we didn't. It could be interesting to look into it. So thank you very much for the suggestion. And in regard to Luca's question, so here we are going beyond like the results of our research and more into the policy analysis. So I will give an answer that is mainly my opinion. So it's not reflecting the position of the team. But as a person who has been working with informality for a few years as a researcher, and also previously I've been working with the ILO, the International Labour Organization, which have dealt and deals a lot with informal work, labor, and formalization of labor. My feeling is that I think when we approach informal economies with the goal of formalizing people, we are applying a very Eurocentric and Western-centric approach to labor, because we live in a world in which at least 60% of the world economy and world labor is informal. So, and still we are looking at informal labor as if it was an exception, as if it was something that has to be overcome. And that the best practice that we all have to tend to is the type of formalization that we see in Western economies. So I think this approach is not very realistic in the end, and cannot work very well, which is the reason why in many situations in the Global South, when there are attempts to formalize informal wage speakers, they end up with these very small companies with a few wage speakers hired, whose conditions often are improved, and a vast majority of the other workers who are prevented from accessing their means of subsistence because they remain in the informality. So I don't know the answer to that. I don't know exactly how we can solve this issue. What I know is that the risk of this type of formalization risks reducing the circularity, risks pushing a lot of people outside, like risks rendering marginalizing even more most of the people that then do not have any more access to the recyclables. And I think maybe part of the answer can go in the direction of looking beyond work in itself. There is a very interesting paper by Dr. Manisha Anantaraman, an Indian scholar who has been exploring wage speaking in India, who talks about reparations and universal basic income. So she goes beyond the perspective of work and reflecting on how we can include people and support people who are working informally through some sort of universal basic income. It's not a complete answer, but I think that's a direction in which we have to look at instead of fixating on formalizing the job in economies that are not made to be formalized.
Thank you, Daniele. So we have the last question. Is there research being done on the metabolic contribution of grassroots, utopians, organizations, and what methods are most appropriate for any of the speakers?
I can try give it a tentatively short answer to this, but yes, because it's something I've also been working on lately with my lab, and there is a paper coming out think in a few weeks on the work on this new utopias in Brussels. We used the term alternative resource governance system, and we mapped several of these alternative governance systems in Brussels and see, how they were contributing finally to the metabolism of Brussels. And the interesting aspect for this research, so yes, the short answer is there is a lot going on at that scale, because it's somehow a new scale, socio-metabolic assessment new scale, because normally we have been seeing also through our presentation, there are systems that have been mapped, as in the case of the agricultural system, of the West-speaking systems, or territory regions. But those new utopias are different scales, different scales in many different geographic scale, social scale, spatial scales, and more larger things. So there is really growing interest in understanding how to assess those scales, and also how to understand their footprint. Okay, shall we see how much, shall we assess how much they have been gathering, and how much do we scale up, because of course this cannot be spread anywhere in the city. They have a specific, let's say, genius loci that has to be respected. It cannot be anywhere in the city. So if they cannot be anywhere in the city, how do we understand the contribution they can make to cities? So in the work that is now been about to be published, we are assuming that we could understand different scales of people that can rely on potential the scaling up of this initiative. So for some people that lives in the same neighborhood, or in the same street, or people that are participating to the new utopia as well. So I think there is what makes this experiment interesting also to understand. So the most socio-metabolic perspective is the concept of the boundaries. So what are the boundaries, social boundary, physical boundary? What are with what we would compare them in terms of how much they would help to feed the metabolism, and if they were to be scaled up, would be the just scale up approach they might we might consider. And we try to assess those questions, and there are not only our work, there are many other ongoing work in Amsterdam, for example, as well, in terms of understanding those interactions. One interesting approach I would also maybe recommend people that are interested in this kind of understanding this grassroots initiatives and the assessment of their astronautics, but also the politics of it. The ongoing research on the public common partnership that I've been launching several case studies and pilot projects, for example, in Amsterdam, in housing project in Amsterdam, in which the traditional state-driven aid or framework to, for example, for social housing, are trying to be revamped, let's say, through taking examples from grassroots circularities. Okay, so how can we, for example, in public housing, use circularity, grassroots circularity approaches to revamp those social housing framing of the common goods, basically. So I think there are interesting experimentation also from an institutional perspective around those public common partnership. So yes,
Thank you very much.
Question.
Thank you very much, Daniela. I don't know if Enrique, you want to say just one word to conclude, but otherwise we are quite late, so it's up to you. You're muted.
Regarding grassroots in agroecology, we always work with farmers and rural communities in participative action research with a circulation of knowledges, practical and scientific and so on. This is key. The pending question, I think, is how we can connect these efforts, which are at the first levels, as I said, of agroecology transition, with cities, and by who in cities. It's funny that in this seminar, the pickers are metal pickers, whereas in our case, we would focus on organic matter, on rest of foods, right? So there is something in between that must be built, of course. From agroecology, we stress the need to build other type of processing industries, of food industries, shorter circuits of threading and the other threading circuits in order to connect cities and scaling up agroecology transitions and avoiding the problem that organic food could become a luxury for people with big earnings and leaving aside poor people. Okay, so here there is a big question to be built and to be questioned and researched, is how to connect both sides in this agroecology transition, by who and which way. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. We are a little bit late, but we call it the French Carter hour, so that's okay for me. Thank you to our panelists. I resend the chat word of Claudio for the next webinar series, 26th of February in 2 weeks. That's it. Thank you very much for all of you.
Thank you very much. And welcome.
And thank you, Enric, Daniele, and Daniela.
Yes,
That
thank
was
you
great.
so much.
Thank you to
And
you.
also Maria Jose and Patrick behind the scenes to organize the setup of this call.
Yeah, this is why the technology was that way.
Okay, so hopefully we will see everybody again in
Thank
3
you.
weeks.
Thank you. It was really great. There's still so many people until the very end.
Yeah.
Great, thanks.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Bye.